based on what Global News reported, I would interpret that the Canadian Muslim Vote is saying, listen, we haven't received anything from this organization that they're alleging that we've received it from, and virtually all of our funding comes from Canadian residents in the amount of over $10,000 in donations. That's what I read from it. I think that's a fair assessment of what that article is trying to imply. Is it true? No. Many people may already be aware that a group of Canadian MPs and politicians was denied entry to the West Bank by Israel. What has received far less scrutiny is why Israel says the delegation was refused, specifically its claim that the trip was funded by an organization that Israel designates as a terrorist group. Let's take a look.
30 Canadians, including 6 MPs, on a fact-finding mission to the West Bank and Jerusalem.
It's important for people to see what's actually happening in the region. So there were planned visits to Christian, Jewish, and Muslim households, civil society organizations.
But even though they had pre-cleared their travel with Israeli authorities, they were stopped at a border checkpoint between Jordan and Israel and held for 5 hours before being turned away. But not before one Canadian MP was roughly handled by Israeli security officers.
And an officer came up to me, screamed in my face, pushed me back into the wall. And then another officer joined him, and he also pushed me back, now this time into some carts.
Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand has formally objected to the way MPs were treated. Israel's ambassador to Canada had no comment on the incident, but he said the delegation was denied entry because Israel alleges the group paying the delegation's travel costs, a registered Canadian charity called the Canadian Muslim Vote, was receiving funding from an entity listed in Israel as a terrorist group.
When they were getting to the border, they refused to cooperate with the Israeli authorities, and so we determined not to allow them in.
But one MP said he was paying his own way.
I'll be tremendously clear, I am paying for my own trip, and that is something that was long-standing.
And he said border officials never said why the MPs were turned away.
They absolutely did not, and we did ask.
The Canadian Muslim Vote said it was disgusted but not surprised by this smear campaign, and it says it has no international affiliations.
Okay, so this is fascinating, right? So you have a group of Canadian MPs, they're basically Liberals and NDP, and they went over to the West Bank. And although they're trying to say, well, we were going to be, visiting a lot of different households, we don't know if that's true or not. The intended premise was to go over there and look at different groups in this housing development that was actually being put in to allegedly house Palestinians within a Jewish community. So that's basically how this was set up. Now, Israel doesn't have to allow anybody into the West Bank. It's up to them. You can criticize that, you can celebrate it, whatever you want. That's not what we're here to do in today's video. What we're here to do in today's video is dig into some of these claims. But we wanted to start this off by showing you the initial post by an MP that kind of started us down this rabbit hole. So this is a post from Aslam Rana, and it reads, on December 13th, 2025, I departed Canada for a week-long trip to the Middle East, traveling through Qatar and Jordan with the intention of ultimately entering the occupied West Bank. I was joined by 5 of my colleagues from the House of Commons, along with a delegation of approximately 30 Canadians, including human rights advocates, NGO workers, and other stakeholders. The purpose of this visit was to learn more about the ongoing humanitarian crisis, to witness firsthand the realities facing people living under occupation Interesting words that he's using there. And to bring attention to recent developments on the ground. As members of Parliament, we traveled on special government-issued passports and completed the necessary due diligence to secure entry into the occupied West Bank. On December 16th, 2025, our delegation arrived at the King Hussein Bridge border crossing. After waiting for nearly 5 hours and experiencing mistreatment of one of my Liberal colleagues, we were ultimately denied entry and forced to return to Amman, Jordan. While we were unable to enter the occupied West Bank, we did meet with Palestinian refugees currently living in Jordan, allowing us to hear directly from those affected by displacement and conflict. Our delegation is scheduled to return to Canada by Friday. I would like to emphasize that this trip was not funded by taxpayer dollars. It was fully sponsored by the Canadian Muslim vote. I also want to stress that our world is more interconnected than ever. What happens in one part of the globe has ripple effects far beyond its borders. Recent events have made the reality impossible to ignore. As elected officials, we have a duty to work towards peace beyond our borders, recognizing that global stability directly contributes to peace and security within our own communities. So a couple things there. Yes, absolutely. When things happen in other parts of the world, it can have ripple effects over here. And some of the ripple effects over here is the persecution of the Jewish faith. Now, last night, Tanya and I were actually invited to a menorah lighting ceremony, and unfortunately we had to leave early because our son was getting, very agitated by the noise and the amount of people. But what is necessary to highlight is the amount of police that were needed there, and they had metal detector scanners going in. You had to be on a pre-registration list. If you were not on the list, you were not allowed entry into the building. There's extreme precautions being taken across Canada just to be able to allow Jewish people to practice their faith. So for you to actually say this in a statement, and you're going across to talk to Palestinian refugees instead of staying in Canada and working to make it safe for Jewish people to actually practice their faith, maybe you should realign your priorities there. Just saying. Anyone of any faith, Christian, Muslim, Jewish, what have you, they should be able to practice their faith without fear of violence, without fear of persecution, and without fear of their government in this country. So I just want to make sure that we put that out there. Now, the real reason that we actually got to be aware of that post was because of a post from the Hamilton Jewish Federation, and that's a group in our city. So this was a statement posted by them, and it's a response to Aslam Rana's statement. Canadians, and especially the residents of Hamilton Centre, deserve the full and unvarnished truth. And as you may know, Aslam Rana is the Liberal MP for Hamilton Centre. Your public statement omits a critical and material fact. While you emphasize that the trip was not funded by taxpayers, you failed to clearly acknowledge that it was funded by the, quote, Canadian Muslim vote, end quote, an organization whose primary funding source is, quote, Islamic Relief Canada, end quote, itself a subsidiary of, quote, Islamic Relief Worldwide, end quote, an organization designated by Israel as a terrorist organization since 2014. This designation and the documented concerns surrounding it are not marginal or speculative. They are central to the decision taken by the Israeli authorities to deny entry to the delegation. Whether Canadian Muslim Vote and Islamic Relief Worldwide reject these allegations is beside the point. Quote, Israel's decision was based on those ties, end quote, and the Israeli government has been explicit about its criteria for denying entry to organizations and delegations connected directly or indirectly to groups linked to terrorism, violent activity, or boycott campaigns against the State of Israel. So that's a little interesting piece of information that Rana didn't put in there, because when he says this was not paid by taxpayer money, he's implying that they paid for it themselves. That's the implication I took from it. But then when we see, okay, this was paid for by the Canadian Muslim vote, and this is what Global News confirms, you start to say, wait a minute, what's going on here? Now, let's be fair. Global News also said that the Canadian Muslim vote, rejects any connections to any international organizations. They said, we do not have any connections to any international organizations. And they're also saying it's a disgusting lie, and it's a fabrication, and it's just an attempt by Israel to launch a smear campaign. Okay, maybe that's true. So we went digging. Now, before we go too far down the rabbit hole, Global News in their article actually expands on what the Israeli ambassador had said. It writes, he acknowledged MPs have been part of multiple Canadian delegations to Israel in the past, including one last year, and that Israel doesn't deny entry to politicians or officials who criticize the Israeli government, as some of the MPs in this latest delegation have. Quote, if we have an indication that they may be supportive of a terrorist organization, that's where the red flags go up and the red lights start flashing. And that's when we want to understand from those people what exactly are their intentions and so on, end quote, he said. We allow people to come in. We allow them to be critical. We allow to do whatever they like as long as Israel's security is not affected, end quote. Now, just to reiterate what the Canadian Muslim vote had stated, in a statement, the Canadian Muslim vote said it was, quote, disgusted but not surprised by the smear campaign being put forward by the Israeli government, end quote, and said that its funding comes from qualified donors who believe in a, quote unquote, healthy democracy. Quote, we know Canadians will see this for what it is, a rather pathetic attempt by the Israeli government to justify why they blocked Canadian MPs from seeing settlement violence and meeting Muslims, Christians, and Jews in the region, end quote, it said. The charitable organization lists Islamic Relief Canada as a partner on its website. Its latest financial disclosure says it made over $527,000 last year, most of which came from, quote, other registered charities, end quote, but adds it did not receive donations over $10,000 from non-Canadian citizens or residents. So those are kind of the two sides here, right? And we started following the accusations. Now, if you read that, based on what Global News reported, I would interpret that the Canadian Muslim vote is saying, listen, we haven't received anything from this organization that they're alleging that we've received it from, and virtually all of our funding comes from Canadian residents in the amount of over $10,000 in donations. That's what I read from it. I think that's a fair assessment of what that article is trying to imply. Is it true? No. And shame on Global News for not digging deeper on this. So we will. So first off, ladies and gentlemen, this is Islamic Relief Canada. This just goes to the main page, and you can support and donate, and there's a bunch of links there. First off, the claim that there's no ties between the Canadian Muslim vote and the Islamic Relief Worldwide organization. Well, this is on Islamic Relief Canada, and that'll be relevant shortly. But what this says is this is literally a question that Islamic Relief Canada has posted on their website, and they answer it. What is Islamic Relief's federation model, and how does it compare to other models in the sector? Islamic Relief Canada is an independent organization that is a member of Islamic Relief Worldwide, which is a global federation of Islamic Relief affiliate offices that operate in over 40 countries around the world. So right there, they're saying they are a member of Islamic Relief Worldwide. They go on to say, furthermore, this model allows us to leverage our capacity to secure additional funding from governments and institutions. Just recently, Islamic Relief Worldwide secured $22 million in funding from the United Nations Development Program to support programs in Afghanistan. So, they're a member of Islamic Relief Worldwide, and Islamic Relief Worldwide is getting tens of millions of dollars of money from different international organizations such as the United Nations. They ask a third question: what is Islamic Relief Canada's relationship with the Islamic Relief Worldwide, and how much are your overhead costs to IRW? We are able to access remote communities that are in need around the world in the most complex environments due to the global trusted infrastructure of our primary implementing partner, Islamic Relief Worldwide, through which the majority of our international projects are implemented. Islamic Relief Canada is a member of the Islamic Relief Worldwide Federation, along with members from 12 other countries, which contribute to projects implemented by IRW. Now, this is a website that takes the data from the CRA and visualizes it so you can more easily digest what's in there. So this is Islamic Relief Canada, or IR Canada. And I was shocked that IR Canada is actually showing revenues of almost $125 million in 2024. That's a massive amount, folks. And it shows that they exceeded their revenue with their expenses. So let's take a look at where they're sending that money, shall we? So this is a list of the top 300 donations that they've actually made to other organizations in the last 10 years. And if you'll see, in 2024, they actually sent the Canadian Muslim vote over $458,000, 440 cents. So in the grand scheme of $125 million, that's not a lot, right? Now, the claim was made that the majority of the Canadian Muslim votes funding came from the Islamic Relief Federation, right? And the Canadian Muslim Vote put out a statement that was saying that this was a disgusting lie. That's what I saw, and I'm just commenting on the facts. So, given the fact that the Canadian Muslim Vote received over $458,000 from Islamic Relief Canada, which is a member of Islamic Relief Worldwide, it would be a disgusting lie only if the Canadian Muslim Vote received a lot more money, or raised a lot more money from donors and other organizations than $458,000, because otherwise it would be true, right? So let's take a look at the Canadian Muslim Vote. Ladies and gentlemen, the Canadian Muslim Vote. So unfortunately, this only goes up to 2023 on this graph, but Global News had reported that they received $527,000 last year. So last I checked, 458 divided by $527,000 is a lot more than 50%. So the allegation that the Canadian Muslim Vote receives the vast majority of their funding from the Islamic Relief organizations, that would be true. So we decided to look back a few years. And what you'll see is the Canadian Muslim Vote last year received $171,000 out of around $200,000 in total revenue. And in 2022, they received $156,000 with about a total revenue of $190,000. Now, this starts to make a little bit more sense because you can actually see a link that we found on Islamic Relief Canada's website where there's a dedicated donation page for the Canadian Muslim Vote, $50, $500, and $1,000. So the claim that they're getting the vast majority of their money from Islamic Relief, that's true. By the Government of Canada's own CRA filings, by the Canadian Muslim Vote, and by Islamic Relief Canada. So that's not a disgusting lie. That's true. And the Canadian Muslim Vote trying to say, well, we're not connected with any international organizations. Well, that's not true, is it? Because you're getting money, virtually all of it, from the Canadian or the Islamic Relief Canada organization, which is a member of the Islamic Relief Worldwide Federation. So why are you making statements to the contrary? I don't understand. Unless you don't want to be associated with a group that is on the Israeli government's terrorism list. I don't know. Now, they're not on Canada's terrorism list. So what's the issue here? And this is where it starts to get very, very strange. So we started looking more into this, and Israel's not the only place that has designated this group a terrorist organization. Would you believe that the United Arab Emirates also designates this group a terrorist organization? And this is confirmed on the Islamic Relief Worldwide own website. Thursday, the 18th of April, 2019, quote, allegations surfacing in the German media claiming that Islamic Relief Worldwide has ties to the Muslim Brotherhood are damaging, defamatory, and false. Islamic Relief is purely humanitarian organization which categorically has no ties to any political group. Our mandate is to respond impartially during times of humanitarian emergencies and empower communities out of poverty through long-term projects. In November 2014, we were surprised and shocked to hear that the United Arab Emirates has listed Islamic Relief Worldwide as a terrorist organization along with 80 other groups. This included several other civil society and community associations based in Europe and the USA. This happened despite IRW never having any presence in or connections with the UAE. On the list of organizations, IRW was described as Islamic Relief Worldwide of the Global Muslim Brotherhood. So this is most likely why Israel has them on a terrorist list. They probably associate them with the Global Muslim Brotherhood, which many countries do have listed as a terrorist organization. So here's where it comes down to this. We come all the way back to this group of MPs and what Israel said. Now, you may not agree with Israel having this group listed as a terrorist entity on their website. And we're not here to say whether they are or that they are not. We don't have that data. But when you look at the reaction from the MPs and they're clutching their pearls and they're all shocked, number one, you have to look at the fact that Canada recently recognized the state of Palestine, which is governed by Hamas, a designated terrorist group. Hamas publicly thanked them 2 or 3 times about this, and then went on to say, hey, you know what? This justifies October 7th, and we will have 1 million more October 7ths because we got what we wanted. So that's number one. So the fact that you're shocked that the Israeli government doesn't want you to enter because of the stance that the government has taken and effectively supported a terrorist organization, you shouldn't be surprised by that. Number two, the fact that they've designated this group a terrorist organization and that it's shown through your government, that the group that paid for your trip is connected to a group that is on the Israeli terrorism list, that justifies Israel's own response, because they've said any group that is connected directly or indirectly to a terrorism group, which they've classified them as a terrorist group, is a security threat. That's why you weren't allowed in. So this is a non-story. And now you have these politicians in Canada clutching their pearls and trying to blame Israel for literally doing what they said that they were going to do. And they were not being dishonest in saying that. We literally just proved it by these filings. You have to wonder why. And why aren't you trying to address the violence in your own constituencies as a result of these global events going on? Why aren't you trying to protect the Jewish community who has been completely transported back in time to the 1930s in Germany? That's what they feel like. And me being a non-religious person, I can say this easily. Practice your faith. As long as it's in a peaceful manner, practice your faith. But that's not what's happening in Canada. The rise of anti-Semitism and anti-Christian sentiment in this country cannot be ignored. At all. So why don't you get back to your riding, shut your mouth, and actually represent your constituents, and stop bellyaching about another country's practices. Believe me, countries have enough complaints about Canada's practices and how it treats their citizens.